Welcome to the Mind Chimp podcast.
Hey Christine, welcome to the Mind Chimp podcast. How are we doing?
Pretty good. How about you?
I'm not too bad. It's been a long time coming, this one, right? Like we've booked it and then I've had to cancel it, I think 2 or maybe even 3 times. So we're here. We've made it.
Yes, it's happening.
So Christine, I guess before we even get into the show, I need you to pick for me 4 numbers. So 1 from 100.
34, 86, and 97.
Okay. So that's 34, 86, 97. I need 1 more, please.
Oh, 4. Can't even count to 4. Oh my God, this is going really well. 5.
5. Perfect. We will come back to them a little bit later on.
Now you know I'm not working in finance because,
I don't know. Some of the people I know in finance struggle with numbers as well. So yeah, Christine, like I ask my guests to come on the show and tell me a log line or a summary what sums them up. Do you know? Can you remember what yours is?
Mine was fairly wordy, trying to stuff lots of different things in. Some of the elements were global soul with a love for words.
Okay.
Which could be interpreted as loving to waffle about lots of things. So we'll see how that goes. There is something about helping people and organizations develop and making the business world better than it currently is, because I think it really, really needs it.
Okay. So we're going to jump into a lot of these, I think, later on today in this. So I guess before we even kind of get into it, obviously, Christine, we've spoke on LinkedIn, we've met in real life. You're one of the actual few people who have actually met in real life. But yeah, I guess a lot of my listeners may not know who you are. So maybe if you could give us a bit of a whistle-stop tour of kind of who you are, where you've come from, all the way to where you are right now on this lovely Thursday evening.
Wow, whistle-stop tour. So I think the who I am bit, I have no idea. Maybe that will kind of assemble. That's probably work in progress. But in terms of key elements, so I grew up in Germany, in case you're trying to place my best of accent. Initially started working as a journalist and in communications. Moved around a fair bit. So I lived in Switzerland, Ecuador, Japan, the US, and now in the UK. At some point, I moved into L&D, and it was quite interesting how that happened, because as I was working as a journalist, my childhood fantasy had always been to be a war zone correspondent.
Okay.
And I actually trained with the German army. They have a course you have to do if you want to go to a war zone for any of the big networks and so on. So I did that course. I realized the course was amazing. It was fully simulation based, really kind of, it's basically a toned down version of what they do for the people in the military. Very toned down, clearly. I mean, but I realized partway through the course, I don't really like loud noises, which is a bit of a problem. I think I'm a fairly adventurous traveler. I do draw the line at minefields being shot at and all these kinds of things. And a lot of that we did, I think throughout the course, I found sort of a few boundaries, which I think is a good thing, because I was sort of in my 20s and I thought I didn't have any, which is evidently not true. I got incredibly curious at kind of, as this course went on, how they were constructing it, how they were, crafting these experiences, how they were leading us through, how they were kind of monitoring where we were, how they were kind of dialing up and down the heat in the different exercises and so on. I just found that endlessly fascinating. And that was kind of one of the things that got me interested in learning and development, because I was then, okay, Warzone, definitely not. But I kind of want some of what they're having. And then the second one was a leadership program I did with an NGO called WISE, World Youth Service and Enterprise. And that one was fairly kind of purpose-based. And I know purpose is a word that people kind of throw around quite a lot at the moment. but that was decades ago when I did that, and it wasn't quite as overused then. And it was genuinely kind of, it had depth in it. I wanted to figure out kind of who I was and what sort of difference I wanted to make, because I knew I wanted to make a difference. And again, kind of this transformation that happened in that 12-day program in myself and what I could see in other people, that kind of got me to actually learning and development, which I didn't really know that was a thing, kind of as something people would do for a living. And then I kind of started finding out more about it. My initial degree was in communication and psychology, which, was sort of useful enough. And then I did lots of other stuff, coaching training, facilitator training, all sorts of tools and methods. I do like going quite deep, so I want to kind of go as deep as possible, and then also kind of turn it into something practical. So I always got the feedback I'm too practical for academia and too academic for so I'm like, oh, but I kind of genuinely really want both. Like it kind of needs to come together for me, and it needs to be practical and it needs to be deep. And I found L&D so far has been a pretty useful playing field. There's tech involved if you want it. There's amazing experiences. There's depth. There's possibly making some sort of positive difference. There's deep work with individuals. There's things you can shift in culture. For me, that's just, I just think it's genuinely really awesome. And that's why I'm still in it.
Wow. So there's a lot I want to jump into there. So and I think we've spoke about this, I think, in the past, but you was while you was in school, you did some work with the newspaper, right?
Yes. So I was one of the people doing the school newspaper, which was really amazing. And I have a friend of mine to thank for that, because how I got onto that was I wrote a naughty poem about one of the teachers, as one does as a teenager. And then she kind of, then you kind of share it amongst friends, like you fold it into a little parcel and you hand it around. And what she did in the next break, she dropped it into the mailbox of the school newspaper. And they kind of liked it. I mean, some of it, there were definitely edits before it went into print, but they kind of liked the idea. And at first I was completely mortified. I was a really, really shy kid, but I found that kind of writing was a way of expressing myself. And also I was the youngest person in the school newspaper, and I was sort of an awkward teenager anyway. So it kind of made more sense for me to speak with older people rather than to enter the who's looking how competition, which I wasn't really set up to win anyway. So so that's how I got into the school newspaper, and I really, really loved it. It gave me a completely different view of my school experience, because we actually got a key to the school building. We were deemed to be responsible enough, at least the oldest two of us. At some point I was then obviously the oldest of the lot. So two of us actually had a key, and that was pretty cool. And that gives you a whole different sense of school and community, and you're writing about stuff that's going on at the school, and it was kind of just a nice way of being involved, finding out interesting things, talking to people. So that was just really awesome. I also learned stuff about computers, which was really exciting back then, because that was a long time ago.
So I guess kind of going from this school, work, doing some stuff with the school newspaper, right through to wanting to be like a war correspondent. Like, where does that come from? Where?
It was kind of, I grew up in a really small village, and I was basically bored out of my mind as long as I can remember. I taught myself to read out of sheer boredom, just because there was really nothing going on. So I thought I think between 4 and 5, so really, really early for that. Because in Germany at school, I know in the UK it starts earlier, but in Germany you start sort of primary school with reading and writing at age 7. So I was way, way early for that. So I was interested about the world. I was interested in current affairs. My dad made it always a point to kind of explain what was going on. We weren't really allowed to watch the main news kind of as very young children, because that, that would not have quite been age appropriate. But there was a children's news program on Austrian television. We were close enough to the border that you could get the signal.
Okay.
So, we'd watch that and then have discussions about it. And he was kind of always, so for me, it was always a thing. You have to be kind of up to date with the news. And there was also a bit of, critical thinking where he kind of explained, there are two different sides, and you kind of, how an argument comes together in the middle. And then for some time I had, at some point then obviously I did start watching the main news, and then the war in former Yugoslavia happened right when I was right around that time. And I remember Christiane Amanpour reporting about it for CNN International. And that just, I don't know, I was just endlessly fascinated. So
Wow.
that was I was like, okay, I want to do that.
Wow.
And then, of course, I went off and did something completely different for a couple of years. And then, but yeah.
But I think there's something about that, right? Like putting yourself into a point, whether you do go kind of war zone and you go, war side, so to speak. So I wonder if there's, a couple of words which have already jumped out when we've spoke, and the words which I've noticed when we've spoke in the past is like curiosity. There's a bit of like a not a rebellious streak. There's a bit of a risk there and a bit of curiosity there. Is that something kind of what's always been around, or is that something you've kind of nurtured, do you think?
I think it's always been the case. I think in my childhood, I think I'm not kind of not intentionally rebellious. I think it's more kind of an accident, because for some reason I grew up with the notion that yes, rules exist out there and they apply to other people, and you kind of need to know what they are. But for some reason, I never quite got how they would apply to me. Sometimes it was just, when you say, oh, but the neighbors are doing it, or oh, but all my friends are getting it, and the parents say, oh, but we're different, or oh, and I think I got quite a lot of that. I also realized that sometimes how my parents lived in the village was different from how everyone else was living.
Okay.
I also understood that how I sort of take in information and so on was different from how others did it. That the fact that I was able to read like 4 or 5 years before everyone else, and in the year, that kind of made that worse. I guess I read the entire local children's library. I didn't know you needed a library card because the librarian knew who I was. It was, pretty obvious. And I remember we would go there and we had, one of those big orange plastic, because 70s, orange plastic laundry baskets. And we went there and I was always allowed to fill the basket to the top. And,
Okay.
that would last me like 2-3 weeks. So my mom was at some point getting pretty desperate because I literally read everything that had letters on it.
Wow. So there's a first there, right? There's a first for knowledge. There's a first for...
Yeah.
It's interesting. I wrote something recently about this polymorph and kind of this thirst for knowledge and this appetite what can't be quenched. There's always something, and actually a lot of what you're talking about there is exactly them traits, right? That kind of constant thirst, and you can never know too much.
Yeah, and it's like, I want to know how stuff works. I want to know the background story. I'm interested in, how somebody turned into who they are. I want to know who built that building and why it looks that way, and why, why the bricks hold together, or, it just, and then you can kind of Wikipedia. I think I could probably spend like a year in there because you can jump from thing to thing. And I think that's something my brain does quite naturally. So yeah, curiosity has always been like that.
But it's an interesting one, because I think just, the questions which are going, like, why is that like that? Why is it that has resulted in that outcome? And why is it what that person is the way he is? But I think when we go right back to children, and maybe it was just my school, I don't know. But there's a risk that the person who's really generally interested and wants to know everything actually can be seen as a bit of a problem in school. Like it's always the same children asking why. You don't need to know why. Well, I do need to know why. It's an interesting one.
It was. I think I was kind of. I think when I got really bored as a child, I tended to get aggressive because I couldn't handle the boredom. So
Okay.
I think people were kind of, as long as I was reading in the corner and was sort of, well fed with a steady stream of information, I was like really nice and quiet and boring. And when I wasn't, I was sort of ripping the paint off the wall, basically. So I think they liked the studious version of me better. It was a bit easier to handle. Yeah. But again, it was kind of, because you mentioned the rebel, because, like I had to be in school with everyone else in the same classroom. But because, back then there was no advanced placement or anything. So, I had to sit through 4 years of primary school at the same pace as everyone else as I was reading the entire library. So, I was like physically in the room, but not participating in the lessons, which also doesn't help with general discipline and going along with what everyone else is doing, because I was just like, yeah, no. I think nowadays I'd hope that the school system would be a bit more elastic to find useful ways of handling kids like that. But back then that wasn't really a thing. Also, like it was still really conservative. So, the fact that I did A levels as a girl was basically a revolution. Like that wasn't a thing,
Really?
Not at all. So, normally I would have, like, people like me would have stopped in, after middle school and, done an apprenticeship and then, get married and have kids.
Right.
And that was it. So,
wow.
So it is quite, that really wasn't a thing. Like the fact that I did A levels, let alone everything else, just wasn't.
So there's an element of kind of resilience as well there, right? Like I bet a lot of people are just going, right, time out, I'm done with this. It's tiring. But wow, that's impressive. That's impressive. I mean, I just think of the frustration of, like you say, you being in school and you kind of being ahead of the other children, and then that must be so frustrating, so frustrating.
Yeah, it was. Like I remember, the beginning of this new school year when you get the new books, I was always super excited. I'm like, yay, books. And I remember with the English book, then I started reading, and 2 weeks in, I was done with the book, and I'm like, oh, that's great. Like, where's the next one? And we're like, no, the next one comes next August. And I'm like, no.
Oh wow. So you kind of go.
I think it must have been quite unbearable for everyone else, I do have to say. I think I learned a lot of self-management, but obviously at that age I had none of that. So I think I was pretty much all over the shop.
So we go from there and we go right back. I kind of want to bring it right back to the tagline. So global soul with a love for words, helping people and making the business world better. So yeah, maybe break that down for me if you could.
Yeah, so I think kind of exploring a little. So I guess I always knew I wanted somehow to make a positive difference. I had no idea what that would actually look like. And, what's it called? The Archimedean point where you stick the lever in and then you can move the world. I think from laws of physics, there's something wrong with that, but, the quote goes like that. I was kind of trying to figure out where that point was. And at first I was kind of, interested in public affairs, and I thought I was going to be a journalist and so on as a possible way of making a difference. But that never quite felt active enough, because I was writing about what other people were doing rather than doing the doing.
Okay.
And I still think the writing, that it's definitely right, and there's an element in there that makes sense. But I also wanted to do more of the doing. And then I worked in kind of the corporate sector for a while. And then I took a break at age 30 well, it was kind of a bit of a forced break because I had a burnout. So one could also say I broke rather than I took a break. But I was then kind of reconsidering, okay, what next? And so I took a time out to kind of get myself sorted out, kind of recover a little bit from that. And then, but kind of came back with the idea, okay, actually, no, it's not because the conventional story would have been, I don't know, I start my own charity or I start a surf bar somewhere, like the usual, ex-consulting company, whatever people do. But I kind of, I did quite a bit of soul searching in that time. And it was really clear, no, actually, you have to go back in there and fix it.
Okay.
Which I still feel really strong about. So wherever that came from, but that seems to hold true. And I had, those biblical reasoning with my faith sort of moments where I'm like, oh God, I just do something else, and oh, this feels kind of big, can't I just get something else? And but it really seems to be like, no, that's the place where I'm meant to be, and that's where I'm meant to start changing things. So that's what I'm working on in one way or another.
So I guess kind of the natural question I would probably want to ask Eve is kind of, well, what's broke? So, I mean, I know that's a really heavyweighted question. I know I'm leading you into it, but like, yeah, what's the thing? What really jumps out to you at the moment, especially with the work that you're doing and stuff? What's really jumping out to you?
I think in a way, business has a lot of potential that it's not using, because very often it's sort of the most vibrant, best resourced part of society and global infrastructure and all of that. And they're using it to mess things up rather than making it better. And, it's not, I mean, I know how business works in the sense of, you need to make a profit or at least break even to be able to keep going and so on. So, I like to think I'm not naive about that. And at the same time, there's different ways of doing that. And most organizations, or I know it's starting to change, but a lot of organizations still seem to make very short-term choices. They seem to be mostly in for themselves. Also, I find very often people who are in the business space sometimes seem to be leaving part of themselves at home that never quite make it to the office. So it's almost like they're, the way they're like really nice and really caring people who have ideas, who are creative, who care about stuff. Sometimes that doesn't show up in the office, where I'm like, well, where did that go? Where did like your playful 8-year-old go? Where did the person go who cares about what happens to someone else?
Yeah. Where does it go? Like, I think, and why? Why is it that people can't bring their 8-year-old self to? I mean, obviously, to some extent, when we say 8-year-old, I guess I mean like the curious, creative 8-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think kind of? Is it a case of some people try to bring it and it gets dampened, or is it a case of some people go, actually, that doesn't belong in this corporate environment? Where, why? Yeah, where and why, I guess.
I think some of it is we've turned it a bit into an arms race. So people have this zero-sum mentality. So if I want something, that means someone else is less. And I think there's probably some areas where it's true, like if we have a pizza between us that has 12 slices and I eat one, then there's one less for you, that's kind of yes. Yeah. But I think in a lot of areas of how people work together or relate to each other, it's not really like that, but people treat it as if it was.
Okay.
And I think they're also very often afraid. So I worked for various consulting companies, and I remember often I had really good, really deep conversations with individuals. And as soon as more than one of them was in the room, even though, I knew all, like these 5 people really, really well when I was doing training stuff or something, the conversation changed so completely as soon as someone else was in the room, even though, it was almost like all five were afraid to be the first one to say it. And they probably would have been all relieved to kind of, drop the facade a little bit.
Yeah.
But somehow that never quite happened. Or, it happened for some people, but it also wasn't really a culture where that was possible. Now, I know that sort of big name consulting might well be sort of an extreme end of the spectrum, and there's probably lots of stuff in between as well. And it's not like, I guess the other extreme would be people think people in business are kind of soulless robots, and that's completely obviously not true either.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Like, it seems people are scared to show themselves. People are also scared to make decisions and then hold them, to be like, okay, I don't think that's the right thing to do, so we're not doing it. End of story.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's also, unless people have a trust fund at home or something, which most of us don't, it's also, it's your livelihood. Like, how much are you really going to bang on the table when you have, bills to pay? You might have dependents in other countries. It might be, your health insurance and all, like, it's not like you're not completely free either to, and, people say, oh, yeah, and you have to take risks and blah, blah, blah. And I find very often the people who shout the loudest are the ones who can afford it the most. But,
yeah,
we also, I think ultimately we know very little of what's really going on in people's lives.
Yeah, I think everyone's unique as well. Like, it's not like the people who are coming to work are all, a thousand cardboard, carbon copies of each other. They're actually a lot of time complete opposites, and someone might zig, other people might zag, and times that by however many options and choices and decisions a person has to make on a daily basis, it's a bit of a minefield. I think there's something about perception as well, like, that kind of, not wolf pack mentality, but that mentality of I've got to be this person around these other people, and it's an interesting one. I think there's a thing of the fear of, we talk about feedback a lot, like we've got to give feedback, but there's also a fear of feedback, even if you're the person who's got to give it. Like, the feedback is, how's that person going to take it? But sometimes you think, actually, is a repercussion of me giving that feedback going to do my personal brand damage, internally or externally? Is it going to, like, there's so many other things to juggle just on having that one conversation, or having that really in-depth conversation of how have you just turned from this person to this person in 10 seconds when someone else has walked in the room. But yeah, that thing of kind of the accountability of bills to pay, mouths to feed and whatever else. I wonder how many times. I think we have an issue where we try to, we've been told to kind of put so many filters on what we've got to say that over time we've lost what the message originally was, what it was meant to be saying. And then that causes a lot more confusion later on down the line.
Yeah, and I think people start planning with the safety margin, and then they just, say 5% less, and the next time they say 5% less than that, and it's kind of like the room keeps shrinking.
Yeah, it's a great analogy for sure. It's very, very true. It's very, very true. I remember I had to have a difficult conversation with, it was someone who was above me, my stakeholder, and it was a difficult conversation to have at the time, we never held back. Like, I'd say, this isn't a personal thing, this is just how I'm feeling and blah blah blah, and it was, on reflection, I remember thinking, that felt a bit challenging, but off the back end of it, like, we've got such a good relationship now. We are friends, and I just think it's good to be able to have that conversation, but the issue comes when you can't, when there's some barriers in place of giving that feedback, and it becomes a little bit warped and tricky. I don't know.
I think the other thing is, and I've been thinking about that a lot. For me, when I started doing sort of more structured personal development stuff, first just for myself and then later as part of training up for one thing or another, doing, facilitator training, coach training, psychotherapy license, like all these things. Nobody actually teaches you how to do that. Like if you're really lucky and you had a pretty good childhood and, had some good role models, you might have picked up some of that. But it's not like, nowhere in the education system, at least not the one I went through. And I mean, I did a degree in communication and psychology. So, there would have been, space for that somewhere possibly. Like this whole self-reflection, how do I self-manage? How do I identify how I feel about something? I mean, I remember when I started doing personal development stuff and somebody asked me, well, how did you feel about that? I literally, I would not have known where to look. I mean, I can't even, I had things like actually realizing how I felt about something. I remember there was stuff like with one of my exes, where I was really angry, but the anger kicked in with about 1 to 1.5 year delay. And I'm not actually kidding. Like it really took like that long to just kind of land. So that took a lot of practice. And it's not like nobody tells you how to do these things. And I think that's also a missed opportunity, because we could all probably be much better with ourselves and each other because some of it is just technique and you practice it and, it's fine. But, we don't even know that that's a thing.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting one. I think, like, if we go down the route of, say, how people have counsellors and stuff, honestly, I honestly sit back and just think it's because the value of a counsellor is because you have an impartial ear. You have someone who doesn't know you, who doesn't know the repercussions of what happens. They just give you an open, honest feedback based on that moment and you. And I just think it's a really missed opportunity a lot of the time, And I guess because, businesses aren't set up for you to all be, not talking to anybody in the business. Over time you're going to make friends and then the impartial ears are going to slowly but surely fade away. But I think that's the value of, like, having, counsel and coach are very different things, but a good coach, a good mentor, like, these are the things which really, really matter, I think. But I think we're starting to see that a little bit now as well.
Yeah, I think the other advantage is pretty much everyone else in your life will have some sort of personal agenda in what they're telling you and what they think you should be doing. Sorry about that. So yeah, pretty much everyone else will have an agenda in what they tell you should be doing. And, like, of course, a good line manager will coach you, but they're probably not completely divorced from whatever outcome comes out of it compared to an external coach.
Yeah.
Or, if you ask your mom or your sister or, your old friend, should I be doing this? Then, of course, they know you, but they also know their version of you, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And they know, like, your past version, and they might have an idea what a possible next iteration of you might look like. But very often it's sort of a linear progression. It's like, oh, he's a team leader in the finance department, so he'll be like a head of something next, and now he has like a flat, and then he'll get a house, and then so it's all like, a linear progression along the same line. And there's not really any room for anything that's not that. And I think a lot of stuff in life is not that, or it could be not that, but it doesn't really come up that way.
Yeah, it's like a legacy of this is how it has to be done. Like, it's step 2 always follows after step 1, and you actually go, well, nothing's ever really a straight line most of the time now anyway. But yet, as soon as we go into, say, a corporate environment, we put these barriers up, right? And we say, this is a process and this is the way it should be done. You go, actually, it's not like, that's not real life. It's not real life.
And also, even like how you even get in there, like if you're thinking about the average recruiting process, it's like, it all needs to like stack up, and very often you kind of, look back on your CV and you're like, oh, okay, I can kind of, craft the story out of that. But like as you were living it forwards, it really doesn't, that's not how it was. You can kind of make it sound like that backwards, but yeah, sometimes it would be nice to have the other conversations as well.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of CVs, so we get told in life we've got to do this great CV, and when you're going for an interview, you've got to be the best person. You've got to show everyone all your success. And I think actually we should really ask, what does your failure CV look like? So if I was to say to you then, Christine, what does your failure CV look like, or what's been the biggest failure for you? What's the one thing what kind of jumps out?
Whew. I definitely had so many. So I mean, obviously, there was also stuff going right, but oh my God. Yeah, so I think probably the biggest one was that felt very momentous, because it was one of those really freakish things where you think that would never happen to me, and until it kind of does. And it was sort of a personal thing, it was a professional thing, it was also where I felt like I just completely failed as an adult. So I was around age 30, I was homeless for a couple of weeks, which I think is, in most respects, a pretty big failure on most counts, really. So I never slept rough, thankfully, but I was kind of couch surfing and doing all sorts of random interim things. I had, for a couple of weeks, I was staying in an architect's office who didn't really have enough work. So I was basically crashing on her office couch. I wasn't allowed to be near the windows. I wasn't allowed to be seen, coming in and out of the flat. I was kind of, hand washing clothes in the sink, trying to dry them on her desk and stuff like that. Bizarre. At the same time, I was going to professional networking meetings and all sorts of things, and people thought I was a really active person because I kept schlepping a gym bag around. And it was like wearing a suit, carrying a gym bag around, and it was so awful. And I realized, people say, oh yeah, and you can get benefits and blah blah blah, which are all people who've never actually tried to get benefits and have no clue how the system actually works. Because it actually turns out you need an address for most of those things, and if you don't have one, that's actually a real problem. And I didn't really have kind of friends where I could, on paper move in. I wasn't really in touch with my family at that time. I had a tiny little bit of space left on one credit card, and that was it basically. That was the lifeline, and that was sort of pretty finite. So I knew I had just a couple of weeks. I wasn't really able to get benefits or any other sort of help. So that was really, really miserable. And it was not something I had really, you don't think that would happen to me.
Yeah. And
then it kind of happens, and it's so surreal. And I think I must have it was almost like, the overload of the situation is so big that I don't think I fully realized how awful it was until probably a few years later, because I just, first of all, you keep going.
Yeah.
And also because you have so little infrastructure, everything takes half a day to organize. Just kind of keeping stuff going. And I was I found an internet cafe that had it was, back then internet cafes was still a thing, where I could go, and it was so bizarre. And then I was interviewing for jobs and stuff. And then I managed from that situation to get a job at BCG, which was really bizarre because, I was homeless, and then I was putting on a really nice suit to rock up at a BCG office and have,
wow.
interviews in the consulting space. And I remember I was really hungry, and there were coffee and biscuits and stuff, and I needed obviously you need to sound smart and so on, but I needed all my self-control to not make a lunge at the biscuits and just distract them. And then it was just oh my God. Um, like, yeah, speaking of putting on a facade in a corporate environment, I mean, that was just the weirdest thing. And yeah, so then they actually hired me. And then things got really complicated because at that time in Germany, you get an actual written contract that's, signed in a wet signature, sent to an actual address, which I obviously didn't have. So it kind of became a bit complicated. Then that worked out. And then thankfully, that kind of provided enough stability to kind of keep, get things back together. Because then with that job contract and the nice looking suit, you can then, like, go to a bank and do stuff. You can then kind of try and rent a place to live and all of that. And I was lucky because the person I was moving, it was a shared house, and the landlord was kind of fairly, nice and jovial, and we kind of got along really well. And he had been traveling a lot and so on, so we kind of bonded. And the only background check questions he asked was with which football team I was supporting to make sure it wasn't like the other one. So I passed that test, and so that was fine. So that was the only background check, but that was obviously really lucky because like I had no references, like, because I couldn't really list the architect, which officer, like that would work. So yeah, and then I started working at BCG, and it was just really weird because obviously also, I mean, that sort of stuff trashes your finances and all sorts of other things. So it became like the beginning was like bizarrely difficult because people have all these fantasies, what your life is like when you're working for a company like that. And my life is obviously nothing like that. I remember I had like, oatmeal in like the desk drawer, and like if I never ever have to eat porridge again in my life, I'd be really happy. Because I remember like the 1 kilo bag of oatmeal was 29 euro cents.
Okay.
And that's kind of, so yeah, I ate a lot of oatmeal.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was just really bizarre. And then, like on Fridays, they had these recruiting things, and there was always food left over. And I was always, because you kind of, you figure out the timings, and then you're always kind of, you just happen to be around when like the leftover food comes out. But yeah, that was really weird to kind of rebuild things.
Wow.
And it does feel, because yeah, speaking of putting up a facade, because obviously, I mean, there was enough in my biography to, say all the right things in all the right places, and you kind of know how the game works. But obviously, nobody had any idea that happened. I mean, I worked at BCG for 7 years, and until the very end, there were 3 or 4 people who knew about it. So
wow.
Yeah, some people, once this episode is out, some people might probably be a bit surprised. But yeah, because I've never really told anyone, because it's just such a weird thing. Like, it never felt like quite the right, just because it's so weird. And it's also, like, and I guess that's some of the things that are, because you mentioned what's holding us back. Because in my mind, I obviously said, look, who's going to trust me with, I don't know, heading up some part of L&D or doing a big global project if you can't even, in quotation marks, keep a roof over your head, It's really, which is something that most adults manage to do pretty well. It's like, should you be responsible for a budget if you can't, like, if
But it's a crazy one,
like,
right? Because that's also a massive success for you in a way, because I mean, I can't relate to that. I can't. But I can probably see how that is something where, again, it comes back to this resilience, what we spoke about at the beginning. Like, a lot of people that would have totally broken. That would have been a thing of, it would have been just slowly but surely. And then you've kind of, you've championed through. And I want to kind of, I don't want to say this is your biggest success, because I don't know you well enough to say your biggest success, but just for me, I think that is an absolute awesome success. But I want to flip it on its head. So we know what your biggest failure, I'll put that in speech marks, but what's been your biggest success? And this can be, I want two. I want your personal, and I want a professional.
Oof. I think biggest personal success is probably that I'm still around and that things are going well,
Okay.
which doesn't really sound like much, but there was just, I think it took a while for me to kind of get to know myself and learn how to team up and partner with myself rather than working against myself, if that makes sense. And I mean, as you can see from that story, it didn't always go so well. So I definitely knew there were definitely things I needed a few practice rounds on, and to just kind of figuring out, okay, how and where do I fit in? Where do I want to fit in? Where do I not want to fit in? What are things that are genuinely me and mine that I want to have that way? Also, yeah, I had like throughout my 20s and most of my 30s, I had pretty disastrous relationships. Like, I think there was definitely also some patterns that needed working through. And so I'm not with somebody at the moment, but there was somebody fairly recently, and that was a completely different type of relationship. So it feels like a lot of that has all changed and kind of evolved for the better. And that, I think that in its sum feels like a success.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for sharing. So, I guess, yeah. So, I want to jump into your books. I want to get into them. However,
go for it.
Before we do, I want to know, other than your books, in fact, yeah, other than your book, what book would you give as a gift to 5 people?
Who? That's really difficult. That's actually surprisingly difficult. I think business books would be easy, like non-fiction sort of, for types like us that work in that kind of space. If they don't have it already, I would give them Reinventing Organizations by Lalou.
Okay.
And as a gateway drug, the illustrated version, and if they like it, they can get the other one and footnote themselves out. Yeah, but I don't know, like I think like what I always find the most gripping, and don't get me wrong, I like the smell of frameworks in the morning and all of that, and I read a shed load of work related stuff as well and enjoy it. But what I always find most gripping is to find a literary fictional reflection of something real. Okay. So I'm always geeking out when I travel to either read books or novels or something that takes place in that place, or is at least a writer from that country, as far as it's translated into a language I can work with. So, like things like I read Walden actually at Walden Pond in Massachusetts, like I do these kind of things.
Okay.
So I think I would probably figure out where people have been or where they're planning to go next, and then try and curate something around that.
Do you find that immerses you into the story of the book more? Is that something you kind of do to help with immersion, or is it just a case of it's just a nice little pattern what you've put in place over time?
I think it somehow amplifies the experience because I have my own resonance to a time and a place. And then I read someone else's. So it's almost like having 2 lives at the same time in the same place.
Okay.
And if it's a place I like, then, twice is better than once.
So true. All right, cool. So that's really interesting. Actually, it's kind of I quite like that. It's a nice take on make. I think it's it's adding more to a book rather than just a book. Yeah, it's really, really nice actually. So let's talk about your books. So
Yes.
You've got a new one which is coming out, and then you've got the values-based one as well. So just, you know, I'm going to not do this service. Tell me about your books, and let's start with the first one.
Yes, the first one. The first one is called Values-Based Career and Life Decisions That Make Sense. And what the book is meant to be doing, it's essentially a taster or a start of a journey, not unlikely what you'd be doing with a coach. So, you know, starting to go deep on some of the aspects and prompting some ways of putting them into practice. So some of the things the book helps to discover is the values. Obviously, that's in the title. And for me, that's quite an important element, because I was looking for something that's deep enough that it's really grounding and timeless. And, you know, there is some bigger element and some depth that you can then use to start hanging other things off of. And I found values quite useful because they're human. A lot of them are universal. So, you know, regardless of what your religion is and what you voted in the last election and, you know, all of that, there are a lot of the core values especially are quite universal. They're also personal. So, you know, if you have 5 people who say family is a value or success is a value, and you ask them what that means, it will still look quite different. So I think making that as one of the elements you're shaping change around, especially if you're, you know, because a lot of people that, for example, that I work with in a coaching capacity, they're kind of mid-career and they're looking for something that has a bit more depth, and they want to kind of make that bigger in their lives. And I find values are quite a useful element for that. And then the second half of the book is really how you can start making that more a part of your life and making that a thing in your change, and also how you can set yourself up better to kind of take those steps and sustain the changes and so on.
Okay, so I guess a book. So
it's basically what I would have wanted in my 30s and didn't find. So I basically wrote the book I wish I had had.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Yeah. I think that's a lot of books and a lot of ideas and stuff comes from friction, right? And the gap what you felt. So the book, how did you find writing the book? Because I spoke to a couple of people who wrote books before, and they said, not a chance I will do a second book. It's stressful, it's hard work, it's a lot of work.
Hey, sorry we interrupted your podcast, but we just wanted to let you know about Venderly, where finding learning has developed. At Venderly, we understand the pain points of looking for reliable vendors and securing new clients. We've created a platform to help you with this, save you time, and help you flourish. We want you to be the first to see it, so head over to venderly.co.uk and take a peek. That's Venderly with a double N.
So yeah, how did you find writing the book, the first one?
I actually really, really like writing. I like editing a little less, and that's also a big part of the journey. but I also I do like it. It's I like how my body and mind feels when I do that. I like it because it's kind of like, in a way, it also forces me to be true to what I'm telling other people to do. So it's actually a really good checkpoint where I'm like, look, I've just literally written people should be doing this because that's the right thing. Am I actually doing that? And sometimes I have phases where I'm like, okay, I can't possibly write that until I'm actually doing it myself. Okay. So I think it's a really good accountability point. It does take over your life. It completely does. it helps to prioritize because it does take over your life. So you then need to reevaluate a lot of the choices around time and, what you do when and all of that. And I find it helpful because, I have a couple of really, really clear priorities, and everything else that's not that, either doesn't happen, gets outsourced, gets automated, or I just literally don't care. And I find that really, really helpful. I haven't had a TV since 2004. So I'm like, I don't need to know what's happening with Love Island once I had actually figured out what that was, because people say, where do you find the time? And then I ask them what else they're doing. And I'm like, yeah, that's 3 hours a day. You can write a book with that. So the second book was basically, the first book was, I call it the second one because I started the other one that's not out yet. I started that first.
Okay.
And then I had a Christmas break where I kind of did a self-imposed writing retreat. And at some point I got so massively annoyed that the book wasn't progressing fast enough, and I wasn't really, that I basically went through my blog posts and all sorts of other stuff I've been writing, and I'm like, okay, there's a shorter, snappier one in there. And then I had a couple of long train rides to Scotland and back and around Scotland. And then I was pretty much, when I came back, I was sort of 70% there with the shorter book. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to plow through and start shipping things. And that worked really well. And now I'm back onto laboring over the other one. Yes.
So it's an interesting one.
It's because I'm definitely not in the stage where I'm like, I'm never going to write a book again. In fact, I have like a whole folder with like mind maps for like the whole pipeline.
Wow.
So we'll see what happens with all of that. But yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I find it fascinating. So I'm trying to think of when. So I have a book deal, and it's interesting. I'm going through a bit of struggle at the moment, figuring out what to write, and so I have dyslexia anyway. So writing isn't a strong point as such, and yeah, it's an interesting one. How I'm finding a lot of stuff which you just said. Then I'm like, it is me. Like, oh, I've got to spend 2 hours writing when really Netflix is downstairs and it's calling me, and I'm like, no, stick to the plan. What was the hardest chapter? What's been the hardest chapter, if you like, or part of the book for you to write?
That's probably in the one that I'm still laboring over, because that one is about values and decisions. So decisions is one way of how the big vision gets practical. And there are bits in the book that are about, how do you recover when stuff goes wrong? Or, how do you have tough conversations about ethical dilemmas and stuff? And some of that stuff is really difficult to write, because I found, like, for me, writing feels really immersive. So it's almost like I'm writing myself into a similar physical state than I want the, the emotional state that I want the reader to be in. Not quite at the same level, but at least so you can physically feel where it's going, and that it starts kind of tingling in all the right places. And that one was really difficult. What was super interesting, I had like the most uncomfortable long weekend. So I wrote that bit over, one of the bank holiday weekends, just because I knew I needed like a big solid chunk of time, and that was the only one. And it was hideously uncomfortable. And then kind of, by the time it was the last day, sort of, after lunch, I kind of realized on a meta level the process I was going through as I was writing that. And I'm like, okay, Christine, you've now just literally cycled through every single defense mechanism you have, with like, oh, I need to clean the oven. Oh, maybe I just literally went through all of that. And I'm like, okay, isn't that interesting? Like, I can't even write the bloody thing, let alone telling other people they should be going through all of that without going through that. So I kind of felt really, like when your catching yourself doing something, you're like, oh my God. That was like annoying, funny, and really uncomfortable at the same time. So I basically then just ripped up most of what I had written, as one does, and I kind of made that a thing. I'm like, okay, you're probably at that stage, you know, and now it's probably this is happening in you. And by the way, you know, because I then just kind of decided to be a whole lot more transparent about it, because I'm like, hey, that's literally what just happened, so I'll just write about that. And that felt a lot better, but oh my God.
Wow. But I think the awareness, the self-awareness of that, right? Like, people could easily find themselves doing that and not be aware to it actually happening. Wow. You're getting through it, though. You're getting through it. This is
I'm doing the work, but I'm also like, I'm doing the work of the writing, but also doing the work, if that makes sense.
So I guess kind of where can people get these books? Like, you know, where can I go now? So say I've got 5 people who want to know about values and 5 people who want to buy the new book. Like, where do we go? Where do we go to get them?
Yeah. So I mean, so there's my website. That's christinelocher.me. Locher is with an H. And the book, if you type my name into Amazon and values, that should come up. So the book that's already out is available on Kindle at Amazon, and all the different regional, national ones as well. So, like, if you're in France, you can still buy it. No excuses. And the other one that I'm still finishing will obviously then also be on Amazon and all the other usual channels. And I will definitely shout about it on the website and everywhere else that I like shouting about things. So Twitter and so on.
Which leads me into a very good segue. So it's like we planned that. So obviously we engage on Twitter, we speak on LinkedIn, Twitter, you know, and you're quite active on Twitter. So I want to talk about social media. And this year with season 2, I've kind of dug into social media a little bit more. And I guess there's 2 weighty questions which I kind of ask my guests. So the first one is social media as a whole. Do you see that as a net positive or a net negative for society?
Ooh. That one's a tough one. I remember I had a job in like the late 90s where the internet kind of started getting like, I'm not old. And people were telling about, you know, how the internet was going to be this great force that would level the chances and everybody would all of a sudden have a chance because online, you know, whatever. Which I think for the most part probably hasn't quite worked out, or at least not the way people were thinking. At the same time, like if I'm looking at, for example, what Twitter has done for me, you know, both personally and professionally, I would not have been able to do that in any other way. You know, meeting people, being involved in discussions, forming relationships, getting insights, getting, you know, seeing people. For me, it's almost like a virtual apprenticeship. You know how, like in the Middle Ages, a craftsman would apprentice with a master, and you would kind of see how they perform their craft.
Okay.
And I find with a lot of people on Twitter, a little less so, I think, at the moment, but maybe 2-3 years ago when I started being active on Twitter, there were quite a few people where it's almost like you could tap into the thinking process of somebody who's really advanced in a field you're trying to be in. And, you know, short of being in the room with them when that happens, and you can't because they have 25,000 followers and it doesn't really work like that. But you still have some chance to do at least some of that. It's almost like you can catch some of the hallway conversations. You can hear people think out loud, and then you hear them speak at a conference, and you can then reflect back on how you could observe them thinking their way into what their point is at the conference 6 months later.
Okay.
And for me, that's almost an apprenticeship of sorts. And I get a lot out of that.
So you said kind of maybe not over the last 3 years or so. So would you say you've seen a shift in say, and maybe let's just keep this to an L&D profession, but have you seen a change in the L&D profession on social media and how people share and what we talk about right now? Or maybe it's how they do it, I guess.
I think there's quite a lot of people who use that as a one-way broadcast channel, where it's just like, buy my stuff, and oh, by the way, have you bought my stuff? Yes. Oh, and here's more stuff. Buy my, or it's like, yeah, okay, I heard you the first time. And I'm saying that as someone who obviously also posts repeatedly that I have a book out and so on. So yes, I know that. At the same time, I also find some of the discussions has gotten sharper, less within the L&D community itself, because I think, a lot of the people that we might also know in person, they're still kind of, the same and equally wonderful. But I think it's just the discussion on social media can also be, because it's open and everyone can join. It's a bit like, not always the right people for the right reasons. And I think it's also then people react really strongly in the way that they might not when you're standing next to them.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I felt massively uneasy, at Last Learning Technologies, there's the anonymous account Bad Learning.
Yeah.
To kind of poke at all the unscientific stuff and so on. And I mean, you've seen me poke fun and learning styles and, stuff like that. So, but I still think there's a difference, and kind of this whole, I don't know, it kind of just, it's that really uneasy with me, almost kind of calling the community to kind of, if you see something, it's sort of like the modern day version of the pillory, if that's the right word. And that was a bad idea back then. And I just think there should be other ways of doing that.
Yeah.
How about talking to someone first before? And, that's just one example. But I think on social media, there's a lot less inhibitions to kind of, things can escalate really quickly. And also, you can say a lot in 260 characters, but it's also really not a lot for nuance and things like that.
Yeah, I feel like there's a, and this is probably from an L&D point of view more than anything. Just because honestly, that's kind of all I use Twitter for now. L&D. I close my Facebook down. I have Instagram and stuff, but Twitter tends to be Twitter and LinkedIn. And I think it's interesting. There's a risk. You get a bit of mob mentality. I've seen that happen on Twitter, and I've actually seen it where no one's really liked it until, let's use the term, thought leader likes it, and then everyone jumps on it. So I think you've got the person who says things really provocative because, well, why not? It's Twitter. I can say whatever I want. And then you've got this thing of this mob mentality, especially that kind of thing which you said there about Twitter accounts. So I haven't followed that because I just feel like you're giving power to something where, all right, someone might still believe in learning styles, let's say, and yeah, it's frustrating when you hear, when you kind of, you see it, people saying, look, it doesn't exist. And one of the things which I've kind of slowly started to figure out, probably back end of last year and this year personally, was stop trying to kind of call it out. You don't know where they are on their journey. Like, just because you've got this awareness of, say, something like a learning styles, it doesn't mean they have that yet. We might have only had that because of our circles and all the research where we're seeing stuff. They might not have access to that. So I think you've got that kind of person. I think you've also got the person of who can take credit for other people's work, but I think you've also there's the other side of the people who. So I asked a couple of people probably a year and a half ago Like we're in an industry where we share, we're all about sharing and knowledge and stuff. Why is it people are stopping sharing? Like really, like you mentioned, the detailed stuff. Like why is that becoming less and less and less? And it came back really quick that, well, that's my IP. Like, my IP is, let's use me as an example. Let's just say right now, the thing which I'm talking about is experience design a lot. But that's only one part of what I do. Like, I'm talking about it because not many people know about it, so I'm going to talk about it. But then, in the same respect, I think there's an issue where people don't really tend to credit people anymore. I think that's where I struggle with it. Like, if you like how I design X, then why don't you say, oh, this is something by Danny? It's a weird thing of nobody really crediting anyone now, because everybody wants to be perceived as the top dog, the thought leader, and I hate that word, but everyone's striving for that. And I think it's a really weird thing. And like when I very first got into L&D, don't get me wrong, I wanted to be that person. But at some point you just go, there's always someone better than you, right? It's like there's always someone who's tougher than you. It's going to exist. And I struggle with. I have a real love-hate with social media. I have a real love-hate with it. Like it's kind of, you need to be on there to be able to share what you know, but then it can kind of capture you to the point where you go, wow, I've just lost 2 hours of my life having a debate with someone in 260 characters.
Yeah. Well, and it's again the facade thing, because you still curate what people see, like even your witty comments and your slightly self-deprecating, like you chose that and you chose all the bits you didn't put there.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of, and obviously, people still, everybody tries and make themselves look good, which is, by the way, why I went off Instagram, because I think I'm too ugly for Instagram.
No.
Like whenever I did something that had like my face on it, my follower count dropped so drastically. And then I put something on with like a nice picture, and then I got like 50 followers back. And then I did a video or something with my face, and then I lost 50 again. I'm like, oh. Well, but it's like, there's a certain aesthetic, and like maybe that's also why Twitter works better, because you can be like witty and post links and stuff, and it's less about what your face looks like. But yeah, I don't know. Like I think there is again, like you're building a facade. You're also then, because you feel like people intimately. And in a way it's true, but in a way it's also not, because their Twitter persona. And I think for some people that's fairly accurate. It's consistent. I mean, curated, but consistent. But for a lot of people it might also not be, like sometimes you then meet people in real life and it's like, you've been friends for 3 years, even though you've never seen them before. And then for other people it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like once you have a conversation that's more than 3 sentences and you're like, oh.
It's so true. It's so true. I remember when I very first set up my LinkedIn account and I was looking at all these other people who was posting stuff. I was like, LinkedIn doesn't feel right for me. Like the guy who wears a hoodie, it doesn't feel like LinkedIn's a spot for me when I very first got into it. And I remembered I tried to do posts and talk in a way what wasn't me. And I just remember thinking, this just does not feel right. And actually I had the aha moment. I was like, why don't you just be how you are with your friends? Like just talk how you are with your friends. And then people, when they judge you, they're judging you based on a right thing, not on a wrong thing. And you are right. There's still a certain persona. There's still certain ways I wouldn't say on LinkedIn, but I'd say to my mates in the pub. Like there's still that, but
of course.
But it's a more honest version of me than what would be the corporate version of me, I think. And I think over time that's done me in quite good stead, because it's also, and I've had this conversation with Nick Shackleton Jones. He's like, that's also the thing what stands you out, like, and I think over time, that awareness thing of actually just try and be you more than try and be someone else is always a win. But it's hard, right? It's hard because you have certain people who who are not them and they're doing really well. It's a tricky one.
It is. Well, and it's kind of, and maybe also, you do it in steps and you see what you can get away with and how your environment, with clients and so on, how they respond. Like you probably wouldn't do that like on day 2, like all filters off and everything. Probably not. Well, I wouldn't at least. But then it's also like once you set something, it's kind of out there and you can't take it back. Like there's no like, there is a coming out, but there's no like coming in. You can't be like, oh no, like just, like it's kind of there. And you're like, oh, okay, I just said that. And then there's like, I called it vulnerability porn. Like people are like kind of getting really excited about other people's really big disclosures.
Yes.
But
yes,
they wouldn't then necessarily. It's almost like, the intellectuals version of watching daytime TV without watching daytime TV, then they kind of.
Yeah. It's an interesting one, right? Because a guy who I know, he put up on his Instagram, here's me helping out at I think it was a soup kitchen or something. It might have even been a big issue, I can't remember. And I was like, it's great that you're doing that, but why did you feel you had to take a picture of it? Actually, it's more value if you didn't. Like, who are you doing it for? Are you doing it? Like, there's always, no matter when you help someone, you're always a bit selfish because the feeling what you get from helping someone, like, you can't help that. That's just how it is. But then there's also the fact of, here's a picture of me doing that thing. So then it's like humble bragging. I can't, it just does not sit well with me at all. Oh, that's my dog there making a guest appearance.
Yay!
So it's a weird one, and I struggle with it. As much as I like it, I dislike it. I think I'm having more fun with the likes of TikTok now, which is a bit more interesting than your standard.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a bit more.
Never quite played with that. I'm scared to start because I don't want like another rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's a rabbit hole for sure. So I guess kind of coming round to, I've got two big questions, and I want to see where you take them. L&D, what's its biggest problem right now?
Ooh, how do I phrase that? If I say itself, I might be out of a job tomorrow morning. No, because it's a bit like, I think it's all kind of the right intentions, but sometimes I think we kind of make something into a thing that doesn't need to be a thing. Wonderfully unspecific. Like, because I mean, it's not, you talk about social learning and blah, and then I'm like, and 70, 20, 10 and all these things. But I mean, honestly, humans have been doing that since we all sat around a guy in a cave who was bashing two rocks against each other. Like, this is really not new, honestly. Like, and then there's like a new term for things and a new framework, and then it comes with a platform and more functionality, and here's another bit of functionality, and if you see, my functionality is cooler than yours, and like, it just becomes this really big thing. And then all of that is there and kind of needs to be used because, somebody bought it and you get like credit for it because there's an article somewhere that says that this is how you do it and someone read it, so you need to like react to it and blah. Rather than really sitting down with people, like, actual humans, like as in the people who are actually going to receive what you're going to cook up, and have a conversation, like figuring out what is it we're actually trying to do, what is it we're trying to fix? Does what we're doing actually do something? Is it fun? Like half the stuff, like honestly, I once had that was like many, many jobs ago, I'm not saying where it was, but like they mandatorily co-opted the L&D department to QA check their compliance training module, which was so awful that they had to make it mandatory for L&D as part of their role to test it. Like all bloody 45-minute click through of it, like the sort where you can't advance and you can't click the thing, where it just makes you want to poke your eyeballs out. And I'm like, your L&D and you hate it, and everyone else hates it. Like, what makes you think that's a good idea, and that's the way you want to be delivering this? Like, half the time I'm like, you wouldn't eat that yourself, you wouldn't wear that yourself. Like, seriously?
So true.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that ties into what the stuff Nick is saying about courses and resources, and some of the conversations we had about experience design, to also think about things in the right size. Like, what does that thing want to be? And then, if that wants to be a PDF with 5 bullet points on it, that's actually great. And if that needs to be a 2-day immersive something for very good reasons, then maybe that's what it needs to be. But then don't look at the agenda and say, oh, it's 8 hours. If we cut the lunch break and we do some pre-work and so on, can't we do it in 6? And let's just do it virtually in 90 minutes. Where it's like, hell no. Yeah, and the other thing is, I can rant about this forever, but then the other thing is also, like the partnering approach, because sometimes people treat L&D like the pizza delivery hotline, like they call in 2 days of time management. That's my favorite, because it's literally never time management. Like, it's all sorts of things, so it's just really never time management. I mean, maybe like once, but and then they expect you to deliver, and I'm like, would you like fries with that? No. It's really, oh my God. Yeah, because I think it could be so genuinely awesome, like all that stuff that, I mean, I certainly felt that attracted me to that. And I mean, I don't know how you feel, but like that kind of stuff that that touches you, that helps you, where you see the light going back on, where you see something really working better. I want more of that. Yeah,
there's a risk, right? Like, we talk about digital transformation and learning digital transformation, and I kind of say it all the time, the tech is the enabler, but you've got to be aware that tech doesn't fix everything, and the more you keep going down that way, you come away from the actual person who you're meant to be helping and supporting and developing. And it's a tricky one, because I get it, businesses want more for less, and they want less time invested but bigger result, and I get it, but I think there will be a tipping point, and I think we've started to see that already. Like, we've started to see that tipping point already, because especially in the day now where, here's a great example. So a couple of years ago, at a company different to where I am now, we brought in a LXP, and the first 2 or 3 things we had when we reached out to our people was, they turned the notifications up on the app, on their learning platform. That's the first thing they did, is turned it off, because it was like, I don't want to see that when I'm out of work. They went to it and then realised that the UX was really, really bad, and then never went back to it again, because it'd take like 15 clicks to get somewhere. So then you've got a different behaviour, and you've got to change. How do you bring these people back into a platform where they've already had a bad experience from it? And then the third one was, it was hard to use. Like, it didn't feel like Facebook, it didn't feel like Instagram. Like, all these apps, what you have there, no one's taught you ever how to use them. You just figured it out. But then we go inside and we give them this technology where you've got to go through some learning to figure out how to even use the damn thing. And the last one was, I'll just ask Bob outside of me how to do it. And it's conversation. People want conversation. They don't want, the business wants tech. The business wants tech. A lot of the time the people don't want tech, they want network. That's just what they want. They want people. They want face-to-face time. But I just think there's a tipping point when the business, hopefully, will start to see that a little bit more. But hey, might not be an hour time.
Oh my God.
So
I'm going to be around for another few decades. Come on. I think statistically, it's not even like, if I go the way my grandparents went, they live way into their 90s, so I'm not even half, not even half time yet.
Wow.
So
that's impressive. So
I'm going to be implementing a lot of digital stuff, assuming that's where things will still be. And
yeah, we'll
God
still be
knows
having
when.
the same conversations. Don't worry, we'll still be having the same conversations. So, kind of taking it onto a bit more of a coaching angle then. So, a lot of stuff which I've seen recently at Learning Tech was coaching tech and the usual jazz, you know, wherever there's something going on face to face, there's got to be a digital solution for it. But take out of that, and I think I've seen a lot of companies who are working with, you know, great coaches and actually, you know, external coaches and stuff, and really getting real good results from the people. I guess the two things, well, I want to ask you on that one then is, what's coaching's problem, and what's the biggest success for coaching?
Wow. The biggest success is probably that it's almost like it reminds people of something, because I think a lot of times it's not actually new. You know, like as a coach, it's not like I'm going in and give them advice. It's almost more like you remind them of something, you know, like, for example, values or resources they already have or something like that. So it's a lot more kind of about holding space, about supporting people to do something themselves. And also in a way, you know, it's not like, because coaching is kind of fairly circumscribed and short term, you know, it's not like the psychotherapy of the old school Freudian, you know, where it's like 500 sessions or something, you know, like that's totally not, like it's not meant to be a lifetime subscription. It's meant to be just, you know, you have a thing you want to explore, and then you explore the thing, and then you've explored the thing, and you get on with your life, and then, you know, maybe a few years later you have a different thing. But, you know, like that's, it's solution focused, it's resource oriented, it's meant to support people. And I think there is something about the time and the space, and that's something people, I'm not saying they don't really have, because they probably would, but they don't really allow themselves to have that. And kind of the going deep, the admitting to themselves what some of the things were they neglected for the past 20 years. Yeah, so I think that's where coaching helps. And in a way, it's also, at least that's kind of how I'm doing it. So I don't think it's a secret science, or should be. And, you know, very often, I mean, I work with accomplished professionals, and, you know, a lot of them have, you know, other, you know, they've read books and they've done stuff. So it's not like, you know, also, I don't think it's a secret science. So, you know, like if people ask, oh, you know, what was it you just did there? And, you know, what's the basis for that and all of that? You know, if people want footnotes, I have footnotes. If they want to know, if they want to do, you know, they're curious about a specific intervention or a specific thing we've done, I'm happy to explain. I'm happy to send them articles. I'm happy to, you know, like I'm fairly transparent. Also fairly clear, where it's like, okay, maybe, you know, like don't go in there by yourself and jump right in, if, you know, depending on where they are and what's going on. But again, at the same time, it's also about developing that practice, if people don't have one yet, to kind of relate to themselves and check in with themselves on a regular basis. So, and I guess the problem then, because that was the other question you asked, is, I mean, at the moment, it's still a fairly premium offer. So people, especially, you know, if you're looking at who gets coaching from a company, which is really where most of the money is sitting, essentially, it's people who, if they wanted to, could probably sort out quite a lot of resources for themselves. Whereas a lot of people who could really benefit from coaching can't get it, because that's not, you know, that's not how it works. Or they wouldn't be able to pay for it, or it wouldn't be, you know, like as a coach, it would be difficult to offer a session for, you know, a rate that somebody maybe who's starting out can afford or something, like as an actual, viable business. And, a lot of coaches do a mix of, paid work and then pro bono work or volunteering and so on. And I do that as well. Because I do think it would be great if everyone could get at least some support. And I think that was also a bit the motivation for the first book, because I thought, well, I would have needed that in a phase of my life where I would not have been able to pay for coaching, but I wanted at least, some pointers in the right direction. And the other thing is, coaching, at least in most countries, is not an accredited profession. So, anybody can call themselves a coach. You have no idea how they trained, how responsible they are with what they're doing, and so on. A lot of the coaching training is shockingly bad. People will do like a couple of weekends and learn a few tools and techniques. And the thing is, it's fairly easy to start a process with someone, you kind of know where to prod and then you get a reaction, but that's kind of not the point, because, you need to basically finish what you start in a responsible way. Like, you can't just chuck someone in there and then start something and then you're like, okay, see you in 3 weeks, you need to get them safely back and in a good state and in a way where stuff can integrate and so on. And, that doesn't mean, some sessions can be hairy depending on where someone is, but you kind of need to know where you are and what you're doing. And, is that a coaching question you're working on, or is that, for example, a therapy question? Like, do you know where you are? Are you meant to be there? Like, do you have any business in there? And I think that territory is quite difficult, and it's difficult to see, how qualified is someone, what work do they do on themselves, do they have a range of options? Because very often, people maybe train in one method, and you can see that if you look at sort of their training bio or stuff on the website, you see like Institute X, and they've done like the beginner, the advanced, the master, the one thing another, and the other thing or another, but all in the same. I think there's also benefits in training with different people and getting a good range. And I think people often don't do that.
Right. Okay. Interesting. So I guess just being mindful of your time as well, really. I've got 4 questions, and it'll probably end up being more than 4, if I'm being honest. But before we get into them 4, tell me about this craft beer. Like, where's that come from?
My alter ego on Twitter.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, really since forever. So my family has a hop farm actually in southern Germany on my father's side. My father was running the farm for a couple of years before he then did something else. It's a hop growing region, teeny tiny, like the size of a bathhouse, and not one of the big hop growing regions, but still, like, people in the industry would know what Tettnanger Hopfen is. So I kind of grew up with hops. The interesting thing is, kind of growing up as a teenager and young adult, I didn't actually like beer. I didn't like the bitter sort of yeasty taste, which is ridiculous now looking back. So that came much later. And I got into this whole craft beer thing when I was in the US, where there's, some places have quite a vibrant craft beer scene. And I was working, I was in Boston, I was working ridiculous hours for BCG, and I became friends with the people who ran the local bar. Because, as I was sort of staggering out of the office looking for some human company to wind down from the day, I kind of just became friends with the local craft beer place across the street. To the point where they actually ended up inviting me to staff meetings, because, I was the sort of regular that was basically part of the setup. Oh, it was awesome. Yeah, and I kind of got, because I think it's a mix of tradition and at the same time breaking rules, and you can see there is a theme in there. There is, there's a lot of science and skill and knowledge behind it. And at the same time, it's also whimsy, and you're dealing with natural products. And one day it's hot, another day it's humid. And, you can do your bit, but then kind of nature needs to do its bit. And I think that's really cool. Like, I really like that. And it's just really cool, nice people. So I started doing a craft beer certification last year, because obviously I'm a training person, so I can't just do something without having an internationally accredited certificate in it. Because hey, and you know, like, I remember I walked into that classroom and I'm like, yep, those are my people. You know, like, it was just like, it just felt so easy. And it's not, you know, people think, oh, you're doing a certificate in beer, and they make like stupid jokes about it. But it's actually, you know, like, there's proper science, and you need to, you know, like, it's not,
Oh, wow.
you know, but yeah, it's just, I just really like it. And I've done a bit of sort of, you know, like, sometimes various breweries do like investment rounds and so on. So I started playing around with that. Fairly small scale, but that's just a good way I found to get a better sense of how that industry works, because then, you know, you're involved with different breweries and you get a sense of what the different styles were and which one went bust and which one didn't, and so on. So some of the investors definitely didn't turn out well. A few did, but it was like, oh my God. But that's, you know, you get sort of a sense of how that also works as an industry or as a business.
Wow.
And I just think that's really interesting. And then again, you know, like, in most countries in the world, you can always find a bar, and because very often I travel by myself, and then, you know, you hang around at the bar, have a chat with the bartender, talk a bit about beer, you know, what's going locally and so on. It's just a really good way of connecting.
It's interesting because I work with a guy called Tim. He's from Germany, and he was telling me Germany have a law, don't they, with the beer where is it 3 ingredients? Is it just? I think is it like there's a certain set amount of ingredients, isn't there, or something?
Yeah, hop, malt, and barley. That's it. So like all the whole, you know, like pumpkin spice ale, watermelon ale, winter warmer, blah blah blah. Like none of they're having none of that. And I remember when I was in the US, and I obviously went like all in on all the flavors and all the crazy combinations, and like bacon maple syrup ale and like all these weird and wonderful things. And like some of my friends in Germany got really upset. Like one of them literally wrote, "Don't bother coming back." And I'm like, what the hell? So like people take it really, really personal. And I mean, you know, like, I think it's the oldest like food purity law or something.
Right, okay.
And, you know, I mean, at that time, that was actually quite amazing, because people would, you know, anything you can get to ferment, which is pretty much, you know, depending on what you're putting together, that's almost anything, not always fit for human consumption, you know. So in terms of consumer protection, that was actually quite amazing. To do that, you know, at a time where, you know, like, you would not have wanted to drink the water, milk would have been seriously risky, you know, like, so it was actually not a bad idea.
Wow. Okay. I did not even know that. That's actually really quite interesting.
Yeah. And, you know, I mean, and obviously I do love the, you know, all the seasonal stuff and the crazy mixes and all of that. But, you know, even if you just take the main ingredients, you can, you know, there's so many different hops. They all have different flavor profiles you can play around with, you know, like, you know, how much you're roasting the malt and all of it, you know, like there's just so many different things than different water. So beer from different regions made exactly the same way will taste completely different depending what's in the water. So, you know, there's massive amounts of craftsmanship, and you can do all sorts of weird and wonderful things with it, even without adding stuff. And then obviously if you do add stuff, you can like knock yourself out with that, which is also cool. But yeah, so I just think it's fascinating.
So what is your username for Twitter if people want to keep tabs on your alter ego?
Well, my my L&D like professional Twitter is Christine Locher, and the other one is Beercraft Christine.
There we go. So I've got 2 questions for you, and then we are done. So you've got a billboard, and you've got 1 million people who are going to come out of a stadium, and they're going to look at that billboard. And you can do anything, say anything, or just do anything with that billboard to shape 1 million people's minds. What do you put on there?
This is going to sound cheesy, and I'm just saying it anyways. I think I will put on choose life,
Okay.
For a number of different reasons. So one is that's obviously the start of the monologue when, of the train spotting film, which left a big impression when it first launched. And there it's sort of the, very mundane, like buying dishwashers and I can't quite recreate it, but your face tells me you know what I mean. So there is something about just building a life that holds up by itself, which, as you all now know, wasn't always my strongest side. So I think, people underestimate how important that is. The other thing is, sometimes things can feel really insurmountable and difficult. And it kind of reminds people to keep going anyways. At least that's what I would hope. And also, life is pretty great. Like it's fun. It's awesome. There's like all sorts of sensory pleasures. It's like really cool, it's just, I think it's really awesome. And I think people sometimes forget that and treat it like a prison sentence, and it really isn't.
Awesome. Thank you. So 2 questions. 1, who's the 4 people you think everybody, whether they're in L&D or they're coming into it or they've been in it for years, who's the 4 people you think everybody should follow?
Oh, wow.
You see why I've gone 4 people, because it's so easy to go with loads of names.
Oh my God. I think I'm going to offend like probably about 100, depending, like regardless of who I'm going to mention, people are going to be offended. I'm also guessing you probably won't let me out of that one, so I'm just going to start.
Yeah.
I think Kate Graham is amazing and people should follow her. She's also fabulous in highlighting lots of things other people are doing. So if people want to get into stuff or into the discussion, she's a fabulous person. Obviously also women in learning and so on. So her. Don Taylor, also because he knows everybody and everything, and he also highlights and shares a lot of stuff. So he is a very good, well, first of all, he's fabulous, but also, he's a great node to be connected to, because then that leads you to lots of other people. And then it kind of really depends on where you want to take things. I really like Nick Ribeiro. As you know, I like lots of people, but Nick always has an interesting angle. I don't always agree with it. Sometimes I'm like, what? But he covers stuff that people don't really cover. He doesn't necessarily, say everything everyone else is saying. He also sometimes asks questions that seem really simple, but really, really aren't. And people, well, you can see people are sort of trying to dismiss it and then realize, oh, actually, that's a really big deal.
Yeah.
And I respect that a lot. And then there is another wonderful person called White Owlie, who also just tweets the most amazing, insightful, poetic, provocative things. Okay. She's based out of Australia, and I will obviously share the links as well. But yeah, she's amazing, and I've never met her, and I hope, at some point that would be really cool. But yeah, that's another Twitter wonderful person that kind of keeps my mind and everything on its toes, and that's great.
Cool. Okay. So I guess kind of right at the start of the session, I asked you, what did you want to be when you grow up? And as you of all people know, we're constantly growing and we're constantly developing and we're constantly learning new things, even if it's about beer or whatever, all the fantastic things we can learn. But if I was to ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up now, what would you say?
You mean from now, as in my next career, or when I was a child?
From your next career,
My next career. I think I'll probably just keep adding things to the portfolio, and at some point it will reach a point where if I add something new, something old will drop off. I do quite like the beer idea. I'm at the moment playing with that without expectations, of this to be a career in any sort of definition, but I love playing with it. I miss working with my hands a little bit. So, like I grew up in the countryside around farms, and, most people around me were not intellectuals in that sense. And, like when I had a part-time job during my last few years of school, I worked in construction. So, like I'm used to doing like pretty serious hands-on things where you see at the end of the day what you've done. Whereas sometimes here I feel like I'm working in a PowerPoint factory, and it's not quite the same level of gratification. So I miss kind of doing practical things with my hand and body. So that might be something I want to explore a little bit more.
Cool. Awesome. So right at the start, I should pick 4 numbers as well. So these 4 numbers tally up to a random list of items. So the story is, Christine, is you're on a desert island and you found these 4 items, okay? And I want to know what you're going to do with them. So your 4 items are a nail clipper,
oh God,
a word search.
A what?
A word search, like a puzzle.
Oh my God.
A sponge and a balloon.
Wow. Okay. What I would do with that? Oof. I would use the sponge to enhance my beach experience, just purely hedonistically, like without any other agenda. I would use the nail clipper to try and clip the word search into something that people can read, like either, try and find patterns in it that make, assuming I don't have a pen and I can't just like write a note.
Okay.
And then I would roll it up, stuff it into the balloon, blow it up, tie a knot in it, and use it like a message in a bottle.
I love it. Awesome tools and skills right there. So we've come to the end, Christine. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
It's been awesome.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this. But last question, where can people, just remind us again, where we can find you and where we can buy your book?
Yes, so christinelocher.me, that's Locher with CH. That's the website, which leads to everything else. The book is on Amazon Kindle, and it's called Values-Based Career and Life Decisions That Make Sense. And I live on Twitter as Christine Locher, my L&D self. And if you're more interested in the beer, then it's Beercraft Christine.
Awesome. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on, Christine. You enjoy the rest of the evening. Bye-bye.